thank you again, Robert, for being here.
Yeah. Well, I hope to learn as well. So I'm really looking forward to this opportunity as well as everybody else. So before I start, I just want to express and hope that everyone's doing well, that your families, your loved ones are all doing well, based upon the circumstances that we have that we're faced with today. Um, so it's nice that you can take the time um, to spend with me, and hopefully, as I mentioned, we'll both learn a little bit. Um, in terms of my background, from a formal training standpoint, from an educational standpoint, I went to school at Central Michigan University, spent some time at INSEAD outside of Paris, and then later at Harvard. And so that kind of gave me a foundation from formal training. But what I really want to spend the majority of the time talking about is my informal training, or what I refer to as my learned experiences. And I think while there's a lot of value, especially in my background, from the formal aspect, the formal training, you can read in a book what it feels like to get hit in the nose, right? It hurts, it's bloody, but until you really experience it, you don't really know. And so I think it's the combination of the formal training and then, in my case, over 40 years of the informal uh, training. So I've spent my entire career in consumables. The first 25 years with Nestle, later with S.C. Johnson and Son. So my first 5 years were sales and marketing with Nestle's, and then sales and marketing supply chain with S.C. Johnson. When I turned 50, I retired, and I had a lot of curiosity to want to play entrepreneur. And at the time, there was a lot that was in the press, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, about ID theft. And in looking at that space, there was basically one brand, which was Fellows in the paper shredder business, and everything else was private label. And so I'm kind of a branded guy, sales and marketing background, a fierce focus on financial results, but I'm mostly a branded guy. And so I convinced Black & Decker to license me their name. And I used to say back then, Black & Decker is in 97% of households, either small appliances, or if you go into the basement, men have tools with Black & Decker, and there's more Black & Decker appliances than toilet paper, is what I used to say. After the last couple of weeks, I'm not so sure that's true anymore. So I played entrepreneur, created the Black & Decker paper shredder, which taught me a ton. Sold that company, then went on to work for another company, World Kitchen, in the space of old tired brands like Corel, Corningware. They were coming out of bankruptcy, so it was a bit of a turnaround. Successfully turned around that company, and then went to work at Paris Presents. My best friend, when we were at S.C. Johnson, when he was in marketing, I was running sales. When I was running marketing, he was running sales. When he was running Europe, I was running North America. And so we became just great friends to this day. Private equity took he and I into a company that they had owned that wasn't doing incredibly well. $8 million in EBITDA, $80 million in sales. And we made it the fastest growing makeup accessory company in the world, moving it to an EBITDA in 5 years of greater than 50 million, and sales a little greater than 300 million. So that's kind of my background, if you will. A lot of bumps in the road that I'm more than happy to share with you. Certainly a lot of failures and learnings from those failures. And Jeff and Brent asked me to mention why I thought today was important. And it's basically two reasons. I really firmly believe that the beauty of knowledge is something that you can give, and the more you give, you get back return. So it's kind of under that guise of really trying to share and build what the second point is, something for the next generation. And I think this is where Talent Path plays such a critical role. I really believe that, as I understand it and the research that I've done, it boils down to two words. Talent Path is an accelerator of potential. I'll share with you my 40 years, my journey, and I wish I had a great accelerator. I had great training, a lot of life coaches, a lot of people rewiring my DNA in hopes of being an even better leader. But this whole notion of sharing like we're doing today, learning from others, and if you act like a sponge and really listen, and if you're that sponge and you take the good and what works for you, squeeze the sponge at the end of the day, and what doesn't work for you, you get rid of. What does, you retain. And I guess that's part of my biggest success is the listening aspect of it, and then applying to what works for me. So as we begin, so that's a little bit of my background. As we begin today, I'm going to share with you a lot of things that I shared in building the next generation with employees that I was fortunate enough to work with. As we start down this path, I always told the employees, whether I was a big believer, still am a big believer in mentoring. And I used to have junior executives mentor me, as well as me playing the role of the mentor. And I learned a ton by in the listening to the next generation. But I want to start off this discussion by having you think about that you're really building a life and not a resume. And I told the employees, they'd look at me and it's like, what do you mean? And I always thought about that, leadership, the soft skills or hard skills, what you're learning today isn't like a light switch where you come into the office, you turn the light switch on, and you become a leader. Or all of a sudden you've got this great wisdom. At the end of the day, you turn the light switch off and you go home. To me, it's all about how you conduct your life. And I think the skills that you're learning today are skills that carry over as a friend, as a parent, as a husband or wife. It's 24/7. And in fact, there's a lot through your friends that you can, if they're all have an opinion and they're playing in right field, I would go to left field. And that'd be my own little test market and play around a little bit. But I really believe that you're building a life and not just a resume. And I think it starts off with values. Everything, when I look back on my career, I was fortunate when I retired at the age of 50 from Johnson to spend a lot of time in self-reflection. What did I do well? What didn't I do so well? What really were my passions? What kind of made me tick? And I talked to a lot of people that had known me well. And so when you look at values, there's a list of, hundreds of different values. So what really frames up you and what makes you tick? And so from a value standpoint, things like humility, diversity, and not just diversity in terms of gender or race or age, but thought. I love to debate and argue. And so one of my values is diversity. I think a lot comes out of having to know people that are different opinions. So just diversity more in thought leadership, more than anything. And then integrity, and I can give you examples where integrity in my career really played out. Trust. Today, a lot of people talk about empathy. I can remember 20 years ago talking about empathy, and it wasn't popular. You were thought to be soft or weak as a leader. And it always troubled me because I look back in my career, empathy is one of the things that really worked well for me. And then curiosity. Never stop being a student. Always. I think of myself today, almost 65 years of age. I'm still a student. I'm still trying to learn. I'm still trying to read, pick, and just have a great curiosity. I think as I saw it in my children, I see it today as a grandfather in my grandchildren, 3, 4, 5 years of age. They're saying, why? And as they grow up, they lose that. And I think we discourage that in our children. And yet you never want to lose that curiosity of why. And I think that really propels you in whatever you're doing in your life and throughout your career. So you be purpose-driven and kind of value-led. And if you have that combination, and whatever the values are that work for you, are terrific. You just make them stronger and minimize those that aren't you. And I would tie the bow on that thought in terms of being authentic, and then a critical thinker. And let me expand on that a little bit. On being authentic, Bill George was a CEO at Medtronic back in the day when Medtronic was a huge success. He's now an adjunct professor at Harvard. He wrote 2 books that I highly recommend, Authentic Leadership and True North. And so when you talk about being authentic, being true to yourself first, and here's the importance of values come into play. I was at the Center for Creative Leadership, 7-day, pretty intense training curriculum. And the facilitator went around the room, and the question was, what's your biggest regret? And we went around the room, and I'm listening to everybody, and I really didn't have any regrets. And the pressure builds up, and it's like, oh my God, I better have a regret. Everybody else is, spilling, their life story and things they regret. And she came to me, and it was a time to be authentic. And so I told her I have no regrets. Now, I have a ton of mistakes. There are thousands of things I wish I could do over as a parent, as a leader. But those, no regrets. It made me who I am, and I'm okay with that. For all the faults that I have and the good things, it's who I am. So if given a choice to do something over again, yeah, somewhere in the future, but it's good scar tissue. I would tell my employees when I shared the story with them, you want to have scar tissue, good scar tissue. And being authentic is a big part of showing your scar tissue and not be afraid to share the mistakes or the things that you've done well. Critical thinking is a real hot topic, I think, today, because when I would interview for positions, everybody says, well, how do you know who a critical thinker is? And for me, it was always, you knew it when you saw it, but you could never describe it. So I'm not helping any of you at all. I would tell you this much. In terms of a critical thinker, you think of it as knowledge is knowing facts. And I think we all, go down that path and acquire great knowledge. Intelligence is, what do you do with those facts? And so a critical thinker is someone who is more, I think, more curious, obviously very analytical, but has the ability to think conceptually, and and show a little bit of courage. So that whole critical thinking is having a healthy skepticism, and a little bit of street smarts. I used to say a little bit of being sarcastic, and maybe that's the sales side of me. But a good critical thinker will demonstrate those kind of behaviors. So Jeff and Brent, that kind of frames up my background, how I think about from a value perspective, what I put the greatest amount of emphasis on as you develop and broaden your own life. Again, I use that word instead of career. In terms of the journey that I went on. And the journey really is one that moves you from a singular focus of I to we. So 40 years ago, I carried a sales bag in grocery stores. And I remember it like it was yesterday, and tell people I think I can move as well in a boardroom as I can a back room, because I've never lost sight of those roots, So the whole personal results is the behaviors that you see in that, is a bias for action, a self-starter, this intellectual curiosity. Are you coachable? You have kind of that fire in the belly in order to get results. So my career went down that path, and this is where I love what you're doing is you listen to this, and as the accelerator of potential, how do you shorten that, and what does that look like? Second stage went into kind of team results, and now instead of being coachable, now I'm in a position to coach. And so that behavior of directing, delegating, supporting, being a little bit more adaptable and flexible, you start to play around with strategy. I'll digress here for a moment on strategy. If you Google strategy, I used to tell everybody, go Google strategy. You're going to find thousands and thousands of books written on strategy. And there's so many courses and training on strategy, and I think I've gone through it all. And strategy obviously is incredibly important, but it's not a hitching post. It's what has to be done. It's as simple as that. Don't spend a lot of time beyond that. It's what do you need to have done? The important part is the execution of the strategy. That's where you want to spend your time. I've worked with a lot of brilliant people, very strategic, and yet couldn't execute at all. And we'd spend hours and hours in meetings, strategic discussion. And but you want to play around with that. What has to be done? Again, it's not a hitching post. So you play around, you try something. If it doesn't work, you try something different. The key is to execute beyond that. Then your third phase that you move into, the behaviors that you see, is what I call multi-relationship. And a lot's been written. Jim Collins, you'll see his leadership hierarchy, level 5. He'll talk about this like in 5 stages. I talk about it in 4 stages. But in this multi-relationships, don't think about functions. Don't think about experiences of, I want to be in sales, I want to move in marketing. Think about building relationships and what that looks like. First thing people want to do when they want to transform a company or look at solving a problem is an organization chart. And I've always said, that's the last thing you want to look at. Look at the white space between in the organization chart, what needs to be done, how are you building cross relationships with somebody else. And that's a real tax in terms of your leadership ability, how you balance your values with results now, how you broaden and have a bigger picture, how you become a conceptual thinker, how you seek and build consensus, and probably most importantly, listen more than talk. So the whole idea is multi-relationships. Are you respected outside of your function that you work in? And what does that look like? When I took over the supply chain at SC Johnson, my CEO said, I want you to go into re-engineer the supply chain. And I'm a brand guy. What do I know about operations, supply chain, IT? Nothing. And he said, this is why you'll be perfect for it. You're curious, you'll ask a lot of questions, you'll probably drive everybody crazy. And because you have no knowledge, and you're perfect for that. It's the curiosity. You do more listening than talking. And I'll share more examples on the listening piece. But I think that that's critical in building these multi-relationships across an organization. I've always thought a company is nothing more than relationships, multi-relationships. And so it's how you use and grow those relationships. And the last one I called is the boardroom results. And there, the picture becomes even bigger. You think about how to build a culture, your impact on the community, things like we're doing today on the next generation. Servant leadership certainly gets a lot of talk these days, and I highly recommend to read or to try anything when it comes to servant leadership. And I think in the area of boardroom, words become very important. So I'll give you two examples. Think of the word even. So when you use the word even, it's like, I can make this even better. I can make a situation even stronger. It's just a four-letter word, but how you use that builds rather than tears down. The word and, so many times people give you choices. We can do this or this. And yet, and can be a very powerful word. I've always thought, let's do this and this. And I think that's how you develop that growth mindset. So words are important. I can do this even better. We can subscribe to do this and this. Words like, as I mentioned earlier, why? So what? My employees had coffee cups made and it said, what if? I went around all day saying, well, what if we did this? Why don't we do this? And then part of that is always favor transparency. I think it's the humility part. Again, it's okay to share with everyone. These are the mistakes I made. These are the learnings that I had as a way to accelerate your potential. And that's what's important for someone like me at the end of the career, right, is you want to leave something behind for the next generation. And this is how you do it, by being transparent, by sharing, and saying these are the things you did well and the things that you didn't do so well. So to kind of sum it up a little bit, I always, probably one of my favorite quotes is that fear is an indication you're about to learn something. So think about that. Fear is an indication. You were sharing charts, and I'm sure, you're a little bit nervous, did I do it right or whatever. If you can get to a level where it's okay, I'm going to learn something. When my first public speaking, I was scared to death, and I'm still nervous. And I think it's a great nervous energy, but I'm going to learn something. This is the first webinar I've done. A little bit of fear. How's this going to go? How's it going to look? but I'm going to learn something. I'm going to get off of this, and Jeff and Brent are going to say, you could have done this better. You talked too long. You should have done this. And it's a great learning experience. So fear, embrace it. Embrace it in every part of your life, because you're going to learn something. And I can't stress that enough. When I was I was a board of advisor for the CEO at Target stores. And he had this great idea to build what they call One Spot, which is alive today. So this goes back, 15 years ago or so. And Bob came into the boardroom and said, hey, I've got this idea. And by the cart rail, if you walk into a Target store today by the carts, you've got all this stuff that's being sold for $1, $2, $3. They call it One Spot. So he had this idea to do this, and we go around the room and everybody said, Bob, it's a great idea. And it came to me and I said, no, why do you want to, take the ring down in Target stores? And in the retail world, frequency and ring is what drives retail. So Costco, for example, doesn't have a lot of trips, but you got a huge ring. And so anyways, why steal a trip from Dollar General? They're not your customer or your guest. Bring the ring down. And when you don't need to, that space is very productive, valuable space. And that evening, after we were done, and Bob and I went out for a cocktail, and he said, I think you're wrong. And he said, but I admire you because you're going to tell me how you think. And this goes back to the values, and being authentic. Again, when the whole room of advisors were all on his side. So Target went out and tested and put it into about 15 stores or so around the Minneapolis area. Then it became 30 stores. Then it went to all stores. And it is the most productive space in a Target store today. I was dead wrong. And one, Bob never let me forget it. Two, I've shared the story with many, so a lot of people other retailers don't let me forget it. And it's like, geez, I'm not sure I'm going to take advice from you. But, what did I learn from that? One, I learned the importance of my value system. I was always, pleased that at least I spoke my mind, that Bob trusted me to speak my mind. And there's other situations where you speak your mind and you're right. But it's that humility of being wrong and recognizing it. And it's like, it's okay. So it's my point to embrace your fears, to be authentic, because you'll learn something. And then, as I mentioned earlier, never stop being a student. I think I try as many new things today as I've ever done in terms of, new learnings. And I'll wrap it up and leave you with this, and that is that the hardest person you'll ever have to lead is yourself. So really spend time getting to know what you do well, what works for you, and what doesn't. So I'm here to talk. You were here to listen. Obviously, you got done before I did. And so I'll turn it back over to Jeff, and any questions anybody has, or go from there.